we are shifting gears to the defense for the Eagles. We're going to go position by position, looking at the Eagles depth chart, and then we have some mock drafts that are out there. We know you're reading them, so we're taking a look at some of the guys at those positions that some analysts think might be a good fit for the Eagles defense. So we are going to start with the safety position. And Fran, when I look at this immediately, what jumps out to me, Malcolm Jenkins was a do-it-all player for the Eagles last year in that secondary. But it's always good to be looking for some young talent, especially when you have a great veteran presence already holding it down there.
Yeah, I think when you look at this safety group and you have Malcolm Jenkins, Rodney McLeod, in a vacuum, those two guys form one of the best safety tandems in the NFL. And you have Malcolm, like you said, a Swiss Army knife, really has been in that role for the Eagles since he arrived here in Philadelphia in 2014. Then you've got Rodney McLeod, one of the best pure center fielders in the league. He can come downhill and lay a hit on a running back. He can play sideline to sideline in the deep part of the field and make plays in coverage. So I think when you're looking at those two guys, they certainly present a very valuable skill set for Jim Schwartz, Corey Unlin, and the rest of this Eagles defensive staff. They add Andrew Sendejo in free agency from Minnesota. But when you talk about a guy like Rodney McLeod, he's actually a little bit similar to a player we're about to break down here.
Yeah, of course, Charles Davis from NFL Network has the Eagles taking a safety, Jonathan Abram.
Yeah, so I think when you look at Abram, here he is at the bottom of the screen, number 38 for Mississippi State. And this guy, Amy, he's a heat-seeking missile. You're going to see his eyes in the backfield. He keys on this misdirection here, sees exactly what's about to happen against Auburn, is able to defeat that block. He just moves at a different speed from the other guys on that defense. So when you look at what Jonathan Abram can do, his game is built all about speed and physicality and violence. He's still a little bit raw, but a lot of the things that you like from a physical standpoint, he brings to the table.
Heat-seeking missile, physicality, and violence. I love to hear that about his safety, and of course I love a DB from the SEC. We're going to keep it in the DB group here. We're going to take a look at the Eagles cornerback depth chart. We talked about this earlier, Fran. A lot of talent there in that room for the Eagles.
Yeah, and it's just a very competitive group, right? I mean, whether you're talking about Jalen Mills or Sidney Jones or Ronald Darby, Rasul Douglas, a lot of guys that have played a lot of reps over the course of the last few years. We saw some rookies last year with Avonte Maddox come into the lineup and play a number of different roles. So when you look at this, going into the spring, going into the summer, competition brings out the best in everybody. And so having all these guys in the building, allowing them to go out and compete, it makes the whole group better. That's what we've seen, honestly, from this group over the course of the last couple of seasons. That will continue in 2019. And
we're going to take a look at another SEC DB cornerback, DeAndre Baker from Georgia. Todd McShay has the Eagles taking DeAndre Baker.
Yeah, what stands out about Baker, you see him here at the top of the screen, very instinctive. This is a three-man route concept from the offense, and they're trying to fool Baker, where they're going to try and send a vertical route his way, take him down the field, stretch the defense, right? That's what we always hear. So they're hoping that that receiver that is matched up against Baker is going to take him down the field. But Baker does a great job in zone coverage. He sees what the offense is trying to do, and he squats on this route at the intermediate area of the field, explodes into the catch point for an interception. He's trying to take this back the other way. DeAndre Baker, very competitive, very instinctive. Those are two traits that you look for at the cornerback position in today's NFL. Not the biggest, maybe not the fastest, but does a lot of things really, really well.
Yeah, very instinctive, like you said, rangy, not necessarily a big guy, but definitely a rangy guy who knows where to be on the field. Of course, we know that cornerbacks and safeties benefit from great D-line play, and the Eagles definitely have that. So we're going to look at the defensive tackle group now.
Yeah, well, certainly Fletcher Cox, one of the best, certainly, to do it for the Eagles. And I think when you look at Fletcher and you look at this defensive line, it's always been about trying to pair somebody with him, right? So what did the Eagles do? They go out, they get Malik Jackson here in free agency. And I know you're
so excited. I can't wait to see those two together on the field. I just get like goosebumpy thinking about it.
I mean, he's been one of the best interior disruptors in the league for the last few years. His ability, I go back to Tennessee when he was there with the Volunteers and he played D-end and D-tackle, was just awesome coming out of college. I was a big fan of Malik Jackson. Really excited to see how he pairs with Fletcher Cox on the inside. The Eagles also bringing back Timmy Jernigan right before the draft. So they've got a nice little trio there on the inside. Trayvon Hester, one of the heroes of the playoffs last year for the Eagles. They've got a lot of talent on the inside, but you can still add more talent. That's certainly something that's going to be on the table.
Of course, in looking at that defensive tackle group, we're keeping it in the SEC, and we're keeping it with Todd McShay, a different iteration of his mock draft. He has the Eagles taking a defensive tackle.
Yeah, and that defensive tackle is Jeffrey Simmons here, number 94, Fletcher Cox's old number there, and he's lined up as a one technique. Very rarely did you see him where he had the ability to just pin his ears back and go, and I think that's why a lot of people kind of project him to be a perfect one-gap tackle, the ability to just get upfield. That's the kind of scheme the Eagles play, obviously. Jeffrey Jeffrey Simmons hasn't been able to test this spring because of an ACL injury, but a freak show athlete, very, very disruptive, and was a big-time recruit coming out of high school. He's a guy that a lot of people are very high on.
Yeah, definitely a freak show athlete. Very well said there. Let's move to the defensive end group. Again, another slew of great talent here for the Eagles. Looking at this, of course, Brandon Graham will be back. Excited to see what Derek Barnett can do coming off of that injury. A lot of great talent here for the Eagles as well.
Yeah, it's just a very competitive group. We talked about Brandon Graham earlier in the show. Derek Barnett coming off of injury. You still have a young player there in Josh Sweat. So they've got some talent there that they're really, really excited about. Another group that will be very competitive. But again, you can always add talent every place along the roster. We talked about the job that Howie Roseman, Joe Douglas, everybody did this offseason where they've got options going into this draft. So defensive end certainly on the table.
Well, and we know that the Eagles love to draft along both lines of scrimmage, and especially Howie in his tenure in the first round. A lot of defensive linemen that he's taken there. So we are looking at an Albert Breer pick, a close personal friend of mine.
Right.
Again, Mississippi State, Fran, you picked all the guys from Mississippi State are apparently going to be considered by some of these analysts for the Eagles here. So let's take a look at Montez Sweat.
Yeah, this is Montez Sweat over on the right side of your screen, going up against another NFL draft prospect in Dalton Risner. He has great length, and he uses his length very, very well. You see him get into the pads of Risner. He's trying to run the arc here, but he does a great job of understanding the quarterback's going to step up in the pocket. He can't let that happen, so he spins off of Risner, and then you see him just chase the quarterback. Does a great job of hunting the quarterback. Really, a lot of sacks, Amy, happen that way in the NFL. It's not always going to be clean. It's going to be those second-effort sacks that result in a lot of your production. Montez Sweat was one of the most productive pass rushers in the entire country, was one of the leaders in sacks in the SEC over the last 2 seasons. So I think when you look at Montez Sweat, you check a lot of boxes. He can play the run. He's got size, blew up the combine, outstanding athletic workout out in Indianapolis. So Montez Sweat certainly is a guy, we're going to hear his name called here in the first round.